Okay, forget the lecture halls, forget maybe, dusty high school memories. Today, we are taking the ultimate deep dive into maybe the most discussed piece of literature, certainly in English, William Shakespeare's Hamlet.
It really is a universe unto itself, isn't it? And we're not just ticking off plot points here. We're plunging deep, really deep into the textual stuff, the history, the complexities that make this play feel, well, always fresh, always kind of confounding and just fundamentally open.
Right.
Our sources today, mostly the Arden Edition's notes and introduction, which are incredibly thorough.
Yeah.
They let us see the play not as one single story, but maybe as, I don't know, 3 or more conflicting narratives, all bound up with the same character names. It's quite something.
So our mission really is to immerse you, the listener, in the history of Hamlet, zeroing in on those characters everyone argues about, and crucially, the big textual inconsistencies, the things that show why this play just generates endless debate. And I love starting here. Culturally, this thing is just a giant. The sources call Hamlet the world's most filmed story after Cinderella. Just think about that for a second.
Wow.
Over 50 film versions. That immediately tells you something about its insane cultural weight.
And that weight rests on a foundation that's inherently shaky. We have to get this clear right up front. There is no single definitive Hamlet, period.
Okay.
We have 3 main conflicting early texts. There's the 1603 first quarto, Q1, that's the one famously called the bad quarto.
Right, the bad one.
And there's the 1604-5 second quarto, Q2, which is, generally speaking, the basis for most modern annotated texts, the ones you probably read in school.
Got it.
And then there's the 1623 first folio, F that came later. Our deep dive is really into why these 3 versions create what you could call an undecidable text, and how that uncertainty messes with everything, from what a character means to where the most famous speech in the whole language actually sits in the play.
So we're dealing with a character, Hamlet, who is full of contradictions, living inside a text that contradicts itself. Okay, let's start by looking at the characters themselves, using these notes to kind of break down who these people really are, maybe beyond the stereotypes we all carry around.
Yeah, let's start with the man himself, Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, the icon, right? The icon of modern introspection. That visual image we all have, the one perpetuated for centuries. Hamlet alone, brooding, holding Yorick's skull in the graveyard scene.
Okay, yeah, I can picture it perfectly. But you're saying that iconic image, according to the sources, it's actually a bit of a distortion?
Yeah.
What's the reality of that moment in Act 5, Scene 1?
Well, the reality in the play itself is Hamlet is decidedly not alone. Not at all. He's actually talking, often cracking these really dark jokes, with the gravedigger. And Horatio was standing right there beside him the whole time. So the sources argue that this famous image, this icon, it basically mashes together 2 dramatically really different moments. The famous soliloquy where he's thinking about action and the actual moment he holds the skull. And why? Because apparently Hamlet as icon has to be alone. The very image we have of him as this isolated philosopher is, well, kind of a visual lie pushed by popular culture.
Wow, okay. That immediately changes the whole feel of the graveyard scene, doesn't it? It goes from quiet, lonely thought to something more like dark gallows humor, maybe even performed for the gravedigger and Horatio.
Precisely.
So if the text says that, let's look at his most defining feature, the soliloquies, especially the big one, to be or not to be. You mentioned this is where the textual instability really throws you for a loop.
Oh, it radically shifts how you interpret his entire mental state. See, in Q2 and F, the main text we use, that speech, happens in Act 3, Scene 1. And crucially, when it happens there, Ophelia is right there on stage. And the audience knows, because we heard it earlier, that the king and Polonius are hiding, eavesdropping behind the arras, the curtain.
So he's being watched.
He's under surveillance.
Yeah. Which means the speech isn't just pure inner thought anymore, is it? It becomes partly performative.
Right.
Maybe even a calculated show of madness to mess with his watchers.
Exactly. That's one major reading. But here's the textual kicker. In the Q1 text, the bad quarto, that very same speech, it appears much earlier, way earlier, the equivalent of Act 2, Scene 2. And the context is different. It's often staged without Ophelia even there.
No way.
Yeah. So you stage the Q1 version, the speech feels much more like a genuine, raw cry of despair from someone alone. But if you stage the Q2F version, it's laced with potential cunning, maybe irony, especially because right after he just lays into Ophelia so harshly. It's impossible to definitively say which is the true Hamlet motivation there.
That's fascinating. So the most famous speech in English, arguably, is textually unstable. It can literally move, and its meaning changes completely depending on where it is and who's listening. Okay, let's try and anchor his identity a bit more. Chronologically, He's often played by quite young actors, suggesting the sort of perpetual student. But what does the text itself actually say about his age?
Ah, yes. The text is surprisingly precise here, and it really undermines that whole young student idea. In Act 5, Scene 1, the graveyard scene, again, the gravedigger, who's presented as this figure of, like, historical memory.
Right, he's been around.
He explicitly says he's been the sexton for 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
and he also confirms that Yorick, the jester whose skull Hamlet holds, has been dead for 23 years. Do the math.
That makes Hamlet 30 years old.
Exactly, a 30-year-old man. Which significantly changes things, doesn't it? His famous delay isn't maybe just youthful indecision anymore. It looks more like the frustration of a mature, experienced heir who's been completely sidelined by his uncle.
That maturity, plus the political context.
Yeah,
Yeah, it suddenly feels less like just a psychological drama and more like a real political succession crisis.
Yeah.
And we should quickly mention the historical casting, too, right? The original actor?
Yeah, Richard Burbage. He originated the role of Hamlet. And we'll see later how the play itself kind of winks at Burbage's own specific place in the London theater world at the time. It's quite clever.
Okay, let's move from the prince to, well, his main antagonist, or maybe his sort of counterpart in spying, Polonius, King Claudius's counselor. And here again, the texts mess with identity right down to his name.
They do. In Q1, the bad Quarto, he's called Carambus. But in Q2 and the Folio, he's Polonius.
Polonius. That name always struck me as a bit odd for a Danish counselor, especially since the Poles, the Polacks, are set up as Denmark's enemies right in the first scene, aren't they? When we hear about old Hamlet fighting them.
That's right, smote the sledded Polacks on the ice.
Does that name choice, Polonius, suggest maybe some kind of irony? Or a jab?
A lot of scholars think so, yeah. The name change, plus his servant's name also changes between Q1 Montano and Q2F, Reynaldo. It might suggest that Shakespeare or maybe his editors were trying to smooth over some topical reference, maybe a specific personal joke or allusion that would have been obvious back in 1600, but it's just lost on us now. But whatever his name is, Polonius's character isn't just the funny, long-winded old fool he often gets played as. He's actually an incredibly sophisticated, calculating spy.
And we see that side, that cunning, laid bare in that scene where he's giving instructions to Reynaldo, his servant, in Act 2, Scene 1. What exactly does he tell Reynaldo to do? It really reveals this darker, manipulative side.
Oh, it's quite something. He sends Reynaldo off to France, basically to set a trap for his own son, Laertes. He tells him to use encompassment and drift of question, which is already sneaky. But then, even more shockingly, he tells Reynaldo to invent forgeries, actual lies about Laertes' behavior.
His own son.
Yes. He suggests making up stories about Laertes maybe drinking or fencing too aggressively or gambling, minor vices, just to see if people who know Laertes will confirm these invented stories. The goal is to, as he puts it, breathe his faults so quaintly, kind of gently hint at these flaws so Reynaldo can ultimately figure out what Laertes is really up to.
That is staggering.
Okay.
That level of manipulative surveillance, he's not just checking up on his son, he's actively making stuff up, manufacturing slander, just to gauge the reaction. It shows he sees the world, even his own family, as just, well, information to be gathered and controlled.
Absolutely. And that's why Hamlet's insults towards him hit so hard. When Hamlet calls Polonius a fishmonger in Act 2, Scene 2, it's not just random crazy talk.
Right.
The Arden notes make it clear that fishmonger back then could strongly suggest fleshmonger, or even a bawd, a pimp.
So Hamlet isn't just calling him a fish seller. He's implying Polonius is basically managing Ophelia like a prostitute, using her as bait to lure Hamlet, which is exactly what Polonius does later when he sets up that whole eavesdropping scene for the to be or not to be speech.
Precisely. It connects Polonius' spying nature directly to how he treats his daughter, making Hamlet's comment seem less like madness and more like a moment of really sharp, calculated truth hidden behind the crazy act.
Okay, now let's turn to Horatio, Hamlet's best friend, his confidant, often seen as his anchor, right? But his role is also marked by some, well, strange inconsistencies that maybe hint at these textual layers we don't have anymore.
Yeah, his identity is genuinely baffling if you look closely. In Act 1, Scene 1, he seems like a local. He's clearly a citizen of Elsinore, knows all about Danish politics, local history, even recognizes old King Hamlet's battle armor.
Right, he explains the whole Fortinbras situation.
Exactly. But then, literally in the next scene, Act 1, Scene 2, Hamlet greets him like he's just arrived. A fellow student visiting from Wittenberg University, a place totally removed from the nitty-gritty of Danish court politics.
So why does that contradiction exist? Is it just, did Shakespeare make a mistake? Or forget?
Well, the common theory, and it makes a lot of sense, is that it's probably a leftover from the hypothetical Hamlet. We should probably define that for the listener.
Good idea. The Hamlet.
It refers to this presumed lost source play, probably written by Thomas Kyd, maybe around 1589. It's the play that Shakespeare likely took, revised, and massively expanded into the masterpiece we know.
Okay.
So these conflicting details, like Horatio being both a local expert and a visiting student, they're likely hiccups that happen when Shakespeare grafted his new, more complex Wittenberg student angle onto an existing character from that older, lost version.
So the inconsistency itself is like a fossil, a fingerprint of how the play evolved over time.
Exactly right. And adding to the confusion, there's a really significant plot gap involving Horatio. He witnesses Ophelia's absolutely heartbreaking descent into madness in Act 4, Scene 5. He's right there when she's handing out flowers and singing those incredibly sad songs.
Yeah, devastating scene.
But then later, when Hamlet returns from his sea voyage and they're finally reunited, Horatio never tells him about it. He never mentions Ophelia's condition, which, given he's supposed to be Hamlet's one true faithful friend, that omission feels really weird, dramatically inexplicable. Editors often struggle to explain it.
Maybe that omission, though, is part of understanding his ultimate role. The sources mention something about casting, that the actor playing Horatio probably wouldn't have played any other parts, unlike other minor roles where actors doubled up.
That's right. It suggests a kind of marking of the role, Giving him no other function in the play reinforces his main purpose.
Yeah.
To be the constant witness, the ever-fixed mark, as Shakespeare might say. He's the one who has to survive all the carnage at the end and tell the whole incredibly complicated story.
Which leads us squarely into the textual maze itself. This inherent instability we're seeing in the characters is mirrored in the texts. Before we dive into the play's big moments, maybe we should just clearly lay out these three key texts again, Q1, Q2, and F. Why are there three, and why can't editors just pick one and say, this is it?
Yeah, it's the absolute core of the scholarly headache with Hamlet. So Q1, 1603, the bad quarto. It's the shortest, it's the messiest, often feels garbled. We call it bad because the dominant theory is that it's a memorial reconstruction.
Memorial reconstruction, meaning?
Meaning it was likely put together from memory, probably illegally, maybe by one or two actors who had small parts in the play and were trying to make a quick buck off its popularity. So it's shorter, it's missing huge chunks we know from other versions, the lines are often mangled. It probably gives us a glimpse of an early version, maybe one they used for touring outside London.
So it's basically like a bootleg recording from centuries ago.
That's a great analogy, yeah. Then you have Q2, 16045. This is the one most academic editions are based on. The belief here is that it was printed from Shakespeare's own manuscript, his foul papers, his working draft, essentially. It's much, much longer than Q1 and contains all those complex philosophical speeches we really associate with Hamlet.
Okay, so that's like the author's intended version, maybe?
Sort of the sprawling literary vision, yeah. And then finally, there's F, the first folio, printed in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare died. This text was likely prepared from a theater prompt book. That means it probably reflects cuts, changes, edits made for actual stage performance, perhaps by the actors or the company manager, to streamline things.
Ah, so Q2 is maybe Shakespeare's full artistic vision, and F is more like the practical, trimmed-down stage version.
That's a common way to think about it, yeah.
Yeah.
And because both Q2 and F seem to have some authority, deriving from Shakespeare's company in different ways, most modern editions you read are actually editorial hybrids. Editors pick and choose, trying to create the best version, but it's always a construction.
And this textual maze impacts everything, right? Starting right at the beginning with the ghost warning in Act 1.
Absolutely. The ghost makes that dramatic entrance in Act 1, Scene 1, wearing the exact armor old Hamlet wore when he smote the sledded poleaxe on the ice, which implies someone, presumably Horatio, recognizes this specific battle gear.
But wait, the timing there is immediately tricky, isn't it? If the gravedigger later confirms old Hamlet's been dead for, what, 30 years?
30 years, yeah.
Then that battle with the Poles must have happened 3 decades ago. Why would Horatio instantly recognize specific armor from a battle fought 30 years prior? That seems unlikely.
It's another one of those moments where I think the sheer scale of Shakespeare's storytelling kind of stretches plausibility. You just have to accept that the armor is a powerful symbol of the old king's warrior identity. But the really chilling detail about the murder itself is how specific it is. Poison poured into the ear, and the description of what it does to the skin, a most instant tetter barked about, most Lazar-like, like leprosy. It's gruesome.
That's such a specific, almost medical detail. It sounds like it might have come from somewhere real, a known source.
It seems so. Our sources, the Arden Notes specifically, trace a potential real-world inspiration for this method. It points to the murder of the Duke of Urbino back in 1538. In that case, poison was allegedly poured into his ears, supposedly instigated by a man named Luigi Gonzago.
Wait a minute, Luigi Gonzago. Isn't Gonzago the name of the victim in the play within the play, The Murder of Gonzago?
Bingo! Shakespeare takes this specific real-life murder scandal where Gonzago was supposedly the villain and then flips it, making Gonzago the victim in his fictional play within the play. It ties the whole revenge plot back to a specific historical echo. It's an incredible little piece of intertextuality.
Wow, that is layering upon layering, using a real scandal but twisting the roles.
It shows just how sophisticated Shakespeare was, blending classical revenge tragedy tropes with, recent, maybe slightly scandalous European history. But then we immediately snap back to textual instability when we look at Hamlet's philosophy itself. That famous final soliloquy, how all occasions do inform against me. The one where he sees Fortinbras' army and finally seems to resolve to bloody action.
Yeah, a huge moment for his character arc.
It's completely missing, absent from both Q1 and F.
What? So the bad quarto doesn't have it. Okay, maybe not surprising. But the folio, the version supposedly used for performance, also doesn't have it.
Correct. It only appears in Q2, the long literary version.
That is shocking. It means that most modern versions we read insert this massive psychological turning point, this moment of final resolution for Hamlet that was either cut for the stage or just wasn't included in 2 out of the 3 earliest printed texts.
Exactly. The omission really highlights that even passages we now consider absolutely central to understanding Hamlet's motivation were seen as, well, movable or even detachable back then. It means the very moment Hamlet maybe shifts from thinker to avenger is potentially optional, depending entirely on which text you prioritize.
That throws so much into question, which leads us nicely into the player satire in Act 2, Scene 2. This feels like one of the most insider baseball moments in the whole play, right?
Yeah.
Directly talking about the theater business in London.
Oh, definitely. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are explaining to Hamlet why the adult acting troupe, his friends, are touring outside the city. And they say it's because these competing children's companies, the boy actors, are just so incredibly popular.
The little Iuses.
That's them. And in a passage that's only in the first folio, F, Rosencrantz says the boys carry it away, Hercules and his load too.
Okay, Hercules and his load. Why is that specific line so important that it made it into the folio, the theater version, but not Q2? What's the reference?
It's a direct, topical joke about the competition. Hercules carrying the globe, the world, on his shoulders. That was the famous sign of the Globe Theater, Shakespeare's own theater.
Ah.
So the line is a wry, theatrical joke. These kid actors are so popular, they're carrying away the whole business, even stealing the audience from the Globe itself.
So the text, printed in 1623 from a theater copy, is explicitly referencing the child actors beating the adult actors at the Globe, the very actors whose lines Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are speaking on stage.
Yes. But here's the extra layer of irony that makes it so sharp. This line, this admission of defeat, saying the boys were winning, it would have been delivered on the Globe stage to Richard Burbage, the guy playing Hamlet. And Burbage wasn't just the star actor. He was also effectively the landlord for the boys' company at their rival theater, the Blackfriars.
Oh my goodness. So it's an incredibly specific, self-deprecating inside joke about Burbage's own business struggles with his tenants who are also his competition.
Exactly. It makes that whole conversation much less about general philosophy of acting and much more a pointed, maybe even slightly painful commentary on the real-world financial and theatrical pressures the King's Men, Shakespeare's company, were facing. It's fantastic detail.
That adds amazing richness. Okay, moving into Act 3, we get to the core mechanism of Hamlet's revenge plot, the play within a play.
Right. This is the moment Hamlet really takes control. He becomes the ultimate director, even an editor of the text itself. It really prefigures the kind of power we see directors wielding today, doesn't it?
Totally. He takes this existing play, The Murder of Gonzago, which apparently was a real non-revenge play, and he renames it The Mousetrap.
Yep, and he boasts about inserting his own speech, some dozen or 16 lines, designed specifically to mirror the details of his father's murder, the poison in the ear. He's manipulating the text, weaponizing it for a deadly purpose.
And his plan to tempt him to the quick, to probe Claudius's guilt, works like a charm. The king jumps up, totally disturbed, calls for light, stops the play, and then later he tries to pray.
And in that prayer scene, Claudius confesses everything, doesn't he? He acknowledges a brother's murder, calls it the primal eldest curse, which is a direct callback to Cain and Abel in the Bible.
That confession in 3.3, it feels like the only moment we really see genuine, deep remorse from the king.
It is. And it sets up the intense pressure for the very next scene, the closet scene in Act 3, Scene 4, where Hamlet confronts his mother, Gertrude.
And that confrontation is just brutal. Hamlet is so focused, almost obsessed with the queen's sexuality, her luxury and damned incest, as the ghost called it earlier. But the scene is also defined by this huge ambiguity about Gertrude's own guilt, right? Does she know about the murder?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's critical here. When the ghost reappears to Hamlet in Gertrude's chamber, she can't see him. She just sees Hamlet talking to thin air.
Right, the incorporeal air.
Exactly. Now, Hamlet sees the ghost in his habit as he lived, meaning in his normal clothes, not the armor from Act 1. But the fact that the queen is completely unable to see or hear the ghost, it just deepens the ambiguity about her awareness. Was she involved? Or is the ghost purely a projection of Hamlet's grief and obsession? If the ghost isn't real to her, does that change how we see her guilt or lack thereof?
That ambiguity is why psychoanalytic critics have had a field day with this scene for decades. And of course, the scene climaxes with Hamlet rashly, accidentally killing Polonius, hiding behind the arras again.
Stabbed through the curtain, thinking it's the king. And the king's reaction when he finds out in Act 4, Scene 1, is just instant political damage control. He puts on a show of horror, but his immediate thought is managing the situation. Hamlet in madness hath Polonius slain, and from his mother's closet hath he dragged him. It's all about containment, not genuine grief for his counselor.
Cold calculation, which leads directly to the tragic fallout for Ophelia.
Yes, the murder of her father, Polonius, combined with Hamlet's earlier rejection and cruelty, seems to be the trigger for her breakdown, her ecstasy, as they call it, which we see so painfully in Act 4, Scene 5.
That mad scene is just heartbreaking. And the sources point out how the way it's been staged over the centuries really reflects changing ideas about female insanity.
Absolutely. Back in the 18th century, she was often played with this kind of sentimental, gentle wistfulness. By the 20th century, you started seeing interpretations drawing on contemporary ideas about, say, schizophrenia. The portrayal of female mental suffering is always filtered through the lens of the specific era's understanding or perhaps misunderstanding of it.
The moment everyone remembers is her distributing flowers in that scene. Is there significance to the specific flowers she gives out?
Oh, very much so. They're deeply symbolic, like a final coded message about the rotten state of Denmark and her own grief. She gives rosemary for remembrance, likely to her brother Laertes, pansies for thoughts, fennel, symbolizing flattery, maybe to the king, columbine for infidelity, rue for sorrow or repentance. She gives some to the queen and keeps some for herself. And then she mentions violets for faithfulness, but says they withered all when my father died. It's like saying faithfulness itself died in Elsinore. It's her last commentary.
Wow. And then the ambiguity surrounding her death itself. Queen Gertrude gives this very poetic account in Act 4, Scene 7, making it sound like a tragic accident, her clothes pulling her down into the brook.
That's the official story Gertrude tells Laertes. But the play immediately undercuts it, forcing us to confront the possibility, even probability, of suicide. The gravedigger scene in Act 5, Scene 1 is just this masterclass in cynical commentary on the law and religion. Well, the gravedigger confirms that the official inquest, the Crowner's Quest Law, determined that Ophelia could have a Christian burial, even though her death was ruled doubtful.
Doubtful, meaning they weren't sure if it was accident or suicide?
Exactly. Because if she just slipped and fallen in, it's an accident. But if she deliberately went into the water, or even if she just didn't try to save herself when she was in, that would be considered suicide. And suicides were denied Christian burial rights.
How did she get one?
Well, the gravedigger's cynical take is that it was her social status, class privilege. He basically says the coroner, the crowner, bent the rules because she was a gentlewoman. He jokes darkly that great folk get away with drowning or hanging themselves in a way ordinary people wouldn't. Its brutal social satire slipped right in there.
A really sharp critique of hypocrisy, right there next to the skulls. Meanwhile, Laertes bursts back onto the scene, just consumed with rage over his father's death and now his sister's. And Claudius sees his opportunity.
Immediately. Claudius is masterful at manipulation. He channels Laertes' raw grief, turns it away from himself, and directs it squarely at Hamlet. He proposes the fencing match, but it's rigged 3 ways to Sunday.
Right, the triple threat.
Not just an unbaited foil one without the safety tip, but one dipped in lethal poison. And just in case that fails, Claudius will have the poisoned drink, the Union, ready as a backup. He's leaving nothing to chance.
Laertes goes along with it, but there's that moment just before the duel where Hamlet actually reflects on Laertes. It sort of humanizes Laertes, doesn't it?
It does. It's in Act 5, Scene 2.
Yeah.
Hamlet says, "By the image of my cause, I see the portraiture of his." He recognizes that Laertes' drive for revenge for his father mirrors Hamlet's own situation. That flicker of empathy, that self-awareness, is maybe what stops Hamlet from being just a cold-blooded killer.
But that self-awareness definitely doesn't extend to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Not a bit. Hamlet rewrites the commission Claudius sent with him, basically ordering the King of England to execute Rosencrantz and Guildenstern immediately, and he tells Horatio later they are not near my conscience. He's developed this necessary ruthlessness by this point. He has to finally act.
Which brings us to the final scene, Act 5, Scene 2. It's just this cascade of violence, isn't it? The king's careful plan starts to fall apart almost immediately.
It really does, because Gertrude, in a moment of perhaps defiance or maybe just carelessness, drinks the poisoned wine meant for Hamlet. That's the first crack in Claudius's scheme. Then Laertes wounds Hamlet with the poisoned foil.
But then they somehow switch foils in the scuffle.
Yes, the staging is often debated, but somehow Hamlet ends up with the poisoned weapon. He wounds Laertes back, and as Laertes is dying, he spills the beans, reveals the plot, blames the king.
And Hamlet finally gets his revenge. He stabs Claudius with the poisoned foil.
And forces him to drink the rest of the poisoned wine, too. Drink. Potion. Double insurance.
Laertes dies, actually forgiving Hamlet and saying the king is justly served. It kind of clears the way morally for Hamlet's own death, doesn't it?
It does. It confirms the political and moral justice of Hamlet's actions right at the end. And crucially, critically, Hamlet makes sure Horatio survives. He literally begs him, "Absent thee from felicity a while, to tell my story." Horatio has to live to report the truth, the occurrence of major and minor importance.
Horatio becomes the living record, the human transcript who has to translate all the chaos and death of Elsinore into a coherent narrative for the outside world, represented by Fortinbras arriving. He sets the stage for the new political reality.
Which brings us beautifully to our final part. Why this play, with its 3 texts, its dozens of contradictions, its sheer instability, why it remains, as the critics say, triumphantly undecidable, and just keeps fueling endless new interpretations.
Let's start with that big split in the 20th century you mentioned earlier. The difference between how, say, English-speaking critics read it versus Eastern European traditions.
Yeah, it's quite stark. The Anglo-American reading, especially after Freud, became heavily dominated by psychoanalysis. Think Ernest Jones and the Oedipus complex.
Right, the idea that Hamlet can't kill Claudius because Claudius has done what Hamlet unconsciously wanted to do.
Exactly. Jones argued Hamlet's grief was messed up by guilt because his deepest, most repressed childhood wish, get dad out of the way, possess mom, had basically been fulfilled by his uncle. So Hamlet hesitates because Claudius is like a dark mirror to his own forbidden desires. The play becomes this intense domestic tragedy about sexual fixation, particularly on the mother.
And that rooting, focusing on the closet scene's ambiguity and Hamlet's relationship with Gertrude, really shaped performances for generations, didn't it?
Hugely. But contrast that with the Marxist or Cold War readings coming out of Eastern Europe.
How did they see it?
For them, especially during the Cold War, Hamlet wasn't primarily about mom. It was overwhelmingly a political play. It was about dissent against a totalitarian regime. Elsinore wasn't a dysfunctional family home. It was a prison, as Hamlet himself calls it. Productions in the former Soviet bloc often emphasized the corruption, the spying, the impossibility of taking clean action within this poisoned political system.
2 completely different Hamlets emerging from the same text,
Yeah.
based on the cultural context. Fascinating. What about more recent academic readings, deconstruction and things like that? They must love the contradictions.
Oh, they thrive on them. It's perfect material. You get concepts like Telma, which is just Hamlet spelled backward. Critics like Terence Hawkes argued for reading the play against the grain, looking for the contradictions, resisting any easy resolution or closure.
So embracing the messiness instead of trying to fix it.
Precisely. They argue that the play's real vitality resides precisely in its plurality, in the fact that it contradicts itself. In that kind of reading, Claudius isn't just a cardboard villain anymore. He becomes a complex, compelling figure, maybe even a capable ruler, whose crime has to be understood within the cutthroat politics of Denmark.
And politically, how have people read the play in terms of its own time, the context of when it was written?
Well, our sources mention readings that see it as a succession play. Remember, it was written around the turn of the 17th century. Queen Elizabeth I was old, childless, the succession was uncertain. James I of Scotland was the likely heir, but it was a nervous time. So some argue the play reflects deep anxieties about, well, female power in politics, maybe about a kingdom's stability during a transition.
Does that tie into the play's treatment of women? Hamlet's attacks on Gertrude, his cruelty to Ophelia.
Some critics argue exactly that the play's apparent misogyny might have served to reassure its contemporary patriarchal audience that female influence was dangerous and ultimately needed to be contained or punished, looking ahead, perhaps nervously, to a future potentially influenced by James I's wife, Anne of Denmark.
But feminist readings have obviously pushed back hard against that interpretation, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned Margaret Atwood.
Yes. Gertrude Talks Back is just a brilliant example of reclaiming the narrative. Atwood completely flips the script on the closet scene. She writes it entirely from Gertrude's point of view, and Gertrude drops this bombshell. It wasn't Claudia Starling, it was me.
Whoa.
Yeah, it completely overturns the entire premise of the revenge plot. Suddenly, Gertrude, the woman Hamlet directs all this psychosexual rage towards, becomes the prime mover, the agent behind the whole political crisis. It's a fantastic rewriting.
And finally, that brings us to the modern era. Director's theater, where the play seems less like a fixed text and more like a canvas for radical experiments.
Directors definitely feel, as the sources say, the pressure to be original, which leads to these wildly different productions. You get things like Charles Merowitz's Hamlet collage, where he literally cut up the text and rearranged scenes. Or think about casting in 1999, the 50-year-old German actress Angela Winkler played Hamlet.
Casting a 50-year-old woman totally explodes the image of the young, brooding prince, doesn't it? How did that change the interpretation?
Well, one critic described her performance as making Hamlet seem like an abused, damaged child in shock. It completely shifts the psychological focus away from Oedipal drama or philosophical debate and towards trauma.
So the play can absorb these massive shifts, gender-swapped casting, radical cuts, being reset in the modern Middle East like the Hamlet Summit.
Exactly. It reinforces the idea that the play is constantly trading on the cultural capital of Shakespeare and Hamlet.
Yeah.
The audience comes in already knowing the basic story, the famous lines. That allows directors to play against that knowledge, to subvert expectations, to make you see it fresh by highlighting its ambiguities and its, well, sheer adaptability.
So we've taken our deep dive. We've seen how the play's enduring power, its vitality, really seems to come from its contradictions, its plurality, as you said. The character's contradictory, the speeches can move, the text itself exists in these conflicting versions, Q1, Q2, F.
Yeah, it's fundamentally unstable, but the ending, politically at least, is decisive. Fortinbras arrives from Norway, surveys the carnage, and immediately asserts his rights to the Danish throne. Order is restored, even if it's a military order imposed from outside. He commands the soldiers' music and the right of war to honor Hamlet, burying the chaos, but the questions, the ambiguities embedded in the text's history, they all remain.
Which leads us to the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Think about this. Hamlet himself, back in Act 3, he takes the murder of Gonzago, he rewrites parts of it, he renames it The Mousetrap. He basically acts as the first director, reinterpreting a text for his own purpose.
He does, yeah.
So if even the 3 earliest printed versions of Hamlet disagree so fundamentally on major points, and if the play itself shows the main character altering a text, can any single performance, any single edition, ever really claim to be the definitive Hamlet? Or is that very instability, its triumphant undecidability, actually its greatest strength, the source of its endless fascination?
The question isn't maybe what did Shakespeare intend, because the evidence is so conflicting. The question becomes, faced with Q1, Q2, and F with all their differences, what version of Hamlet would you choose to put on stage? What story would you tell? That's where the deep dive really continues for every reader, every director, every audience member.
A perfect place to leave it. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into this shifting, endlessly fascinating world of Elsinore's tragedy. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.